I'm Mike McShaffry, and I'm one of the principal engineers here at ArtCraft. And I work mostly on the client side and some with AWS, which is Amazon. That's where we host our servers. I started in the games industry in 1990, which for those of you who are keeping score, that's before computers actually had hard drives. My wife and I were living in Houston, Texas at the time, and Origin Systems had just moved to Austin, Texas. I was ready to make a change, have my first big job out of college, and I sent my resume into Origin Systems and heard nothing. I called and I'm like, hey, why didn't, I didn't get a call back, did you get my resume? And they're like, well, did you send your resume, directly, to Origin, or who did you send it? I said, I sent it to Richard Garriott. They went, well, that's the problem here. Send it to this person. And I got a phone call almost immediately. And 2 days later, I had the job interview. And 3 days after that, I had the offer. And my wife and I moved to Austin, Texas, and we've been here ever since. So a little bit about my work history. At Origin Systems, I was mostly a programmer. I did a little bit of project management as well on the Ultima 8 project. And then I went back to doing principal engineer work on the Ultima Online project, which was where I got most of my experience in MMOs. What I did then, I worked on the login systems and the backend database systems and some of the metric systems, which were very, very early in those days. Once Ultima Online shipped, a few friends of mine and I decided to start our own company called Tornado Alley. We were attempting to create an online, massively multiplayer game for kids called No Grown-Ups Allowed. At the time, we weren't as successful, even though it was the .com boom. Turns out that toy companies like Hasbro and even Disney didn't want to spend any more than about $500,000 on any title that they did. So it was a harsh lesson for us, but it was many good things learned and things that we carry, all of us carry forward, to our current jobs. After we shut down Tornado Alley, I got a job at Glass Eye Entertainment. And what they were doing was pretty interesting. They were working with Microsoft on some casual games that incorporated the Mirage Resorts hotels in a casino game. So blackjack, craps, that kind of thing. It was the only game that my mom called me after we shipped it, and she said, Mike, I really love playing your game. We actually got to go on a video and photo shoot to the Bellagio High Roller Room.
I'm all in.
Unless you've seen $2.5 million on a blackjack table, you haven't really lived. It was a bizarre and interesting trip. Once we wound up Compulsive Development, I was really interested in looking and getting into console work, especially the Xbox. Warren Spector, at the time, was working on Thief Deadly Shadows at Ion Storm Austin. And it was really interesting to me to try to get a job with them, and that's exactly what happened. And they hired me to do the third-person camera technology for that game, which probably makes me very loved by some Thief fans and very hated by others who really thought it never should have been a third-person game. Once Ion Storm closed the Austin office, I was approached by Breakaway Games, a Maryland-based company that typically did real-time strategy games and games for the U.S. military. They wanted us to do some console work down here in Austin, and so we opened up a small satellite studio. One of the things we worked on, which was really interesting, was actually a training simulator for the United States Navy. It was called 24 Blue, and in order to do research for this game, they flew us out to an aircraft carrier. It was the USS Harry S. Truman, doing training mission out in the Atlantic Ocean. And we stayed out there with the crew for 4 days and walked around on deck with all of the aircraft moving around, and it was one of the most exciting experiences I've ever had. We would walk around and we would talk to various members of the crew, and of course, we were all in blue jeans and t-shirts, and I had long hair at the time, and so they knew we weren't part of the US military. We were clearly contractors or VIPs. And once they found out we were game developers, boy, they were just loving us. We were like rock stars there. And they all invited us to come to the CIC, the Combat Information Center, where every night after flight ops, they unplug all those big screens that you've seen in there, and they hook up their Xboxes, and they played Halo until about 3 in the morning. So those guys loved their games, even out there in the Atlantic Ocean. The last day we were there, one of the officers said, guys, turns out I'm going to be your shooter today, which is the guys in yellow jackets that point off the end of the aircraft carrier when planes get launched. He says, you know what? I'm going to turn up the juice for you a little bit. And when that plane shot off that deck, we all screamed like little girls. On and off throughout my career, I've done some consulting work. Typically it was production work, mostly helping companies get contacts and sign projects or plan projects. So, probably half of my career I've been doing production work, and then the other half of my career I've been doing engineering work. One of the companies that I helped was Arcane Studios. At the time, they were creating a game called The Crossing, and it was a really interesting game. It never got signed, but we talked to tons of publishers, and it was a really great experience to take The Crossing around to show and have them play and have them scream at each other across the table as they were playing this great multiplayer game. Arcane is the same company now that is owned by ZeniMax and has worked on the Dishonored series, so it's good to see them do very well. One of the companies that contacted me while I was a contractor was Red Fly Studio, run by Dan Borth here in Austin, Texas. And they were working on a new IP game called Mushroom Men for the Nintendo Wii. And they hired me to come in and help, plan the finaling of Mushroom Men. They were nearly done with production, and they just needed to help it, get out the door. Turns out I never left for 5 years. They hired me full-time, and we worked on a bunch of different Wii titles while I was there, including Ghostbusters the video game, which is great for the Wii. If you've never played it, I highly recommend it. And Star Wars Force Unleashed 2 for the Wii as well, and Thor for the 3DS. It was an extremely rewarding experience. Towards the end of that time, the Wii, was kind of falling out of favor with publishers. They were moving on to other platforms. And so Red Fly wanted to try their hand at doing iOS and Android games. And so I went back to doing engineering and cut my teeth on doing mobile titles. Back in 2005, I was at GDC with a really good friend, and we were having lunch. And I had just picked up a book called Game Programming for 3D Gurus or something like that. And I was flipping through it, and I really didn't like the book very much, and I thought it was kind of a reprint of all the DirectX help manuals. And I complained to my friend, I was like, I could do a much better job than this. I mean, I should write a book someday. And he goes, well, as it turns out, I'm actually helping a friend look for authors. And I went, uh-oh, I think I've put my foot in my mouth this time. And within a couple of weeks, I'd signed a contract, my first contract to write my first book. And we published it under the title Game Coding Complete, and it was originally out in, I think, about 2005, right at GDC. Game Coding Complete is now in its 4th edition. Luckily, I was able to convince actually one of the readers of the 1st edition, my co-author David Graham, to help me write half of the 4th edition, which was great. And it's still in print, and we're talking about maybe doing a 5th edition. It's just a matter of convincing the publisher that it's a good idea. For some reason, we're still wanting to jump in there and do it. And for anybody out there who's interested in writing a book, I can tell you that there is some money in it, but very little. But it's an itch that sometimes you really want to scratch. And I'm very happy with what we've come up with. We also have an online community. You can actually just go search for my name online, and it's one of the first web pages that pops up. And it's a great community of professional game developers, programmers, and hobbyists, and people looking into getting into the industry, helping each other out, learning how to program games. So go up there and visit it sometime. So after Red Fly, I did a little bit of freelance work, working on mobile titles. I actually helped out Certain Affinity on their Age of Booty title for a little while. That was a lot of fun. And then I was approached by Gordon Walton, who I'd known for years and years and years through the International Game Developers Association and just bopping around here in Austin, Texas. And he said, well, Mike, what are you up to? And I said, well, I'm freelancing. He says, well, do you want to consider doing something other than freelancing? And I said, sure. I've always kind of wanted to work with Gordon. And he introduced me to Todd Coleman and told me what they were up to. And I was very, very interested and intrigued. They hired me full-time after a bit of a contract work here. And now I'm on the Crowfall project and working as a principal engineer on mostly the back-end systems and some client systems. And it's actually one of the most interesting and rewarding companies I've ever worked for, because even though we're a startup and we're a very small team and we're trying to do an awful lot with very few people, the atmosphere here is professional, relaxed, and it's something that I really, really cherish. It's actually something I've looked for the entire 26 years I've been in the games industry. I've never found a company that was this comfortable to work for and yet energetic and passionate. Probably about 8 years ago, some friends of mine approached me about attending an event here in Texas called Flipside. It is a much smaller version of another event that some of you may have heard of called Burning Man. And I started attending this Flipside event, and I guess the best way to characterize it is it's an art and music festival held out in the Texas countryside, where every person is accepted for who they are, and that's it. And so, therein lies where the hair color comes from. It's like, I've always wanted to do it, and so I started doing it, as I attended these events. And it's really neat. If you've never tried it, you should consider it. One interesting side note is that after a while, of course, I began to want to go to Burning Man. And literally 2 days ago, I just arrived back in Austin after my first trip out to something they call That Thing in the Desert, or the Gerlach Regional, or Burning Man. And one thing I will say about it is one of the most amazing experiences I think I have ever had. It's so large, and the scope and scale of it is so far beyond your ability to conceive of it, that when you come back into what they call the default world, which is the world we all live in, it actually takes a little time to get used to. But if you ever want to go exist in one of the harshest places a human being could ever go on this planet, and surround yourself with some of the most wonderful people and the most creative art, go try Burning Man sometime. Two quick, interesting stories about Burning Man. My wife and I were involved in a 50-mile traffic jam to get inside the event. So after 15 hours of driving that day from Durango, Colorado up to near Black Rock City, which is where Burning Man is held, traffic completely stopped on the road. And from that point, we were still 50 miles away from the front gate. And it took 8 hours all night for us to actually arrive at the gate of Burning Man. An exhausting and pretty terrible experience, actually. But it was all kind of made worth it as we approached the gate and approached the greeter station, where everybody gets out of their cars and everybody gets big hugs. Welcome, welcome home. The sun was coming up over the horizon, and we were seeing the city in daylight for the first time. And it was, after that experience, it was pretty magical, even as tired as we were. There's a thing that happens with the weather out there. When the wind kicks up, all the sand and dust on the ground get blown up into the air, and it's called a whiteout. And you literally can't see more than 4 or 5 feet in front of you at times. And my wife and I really wanted to take that day, even though the weather was really bad, to travel out to the temple, which is a somewhat sacred space, where people let go of things that they're trying to heal themselves of, whether that be something horrible that they did early in their life, or maybe a loved one that has died, or something of that nature. It's a heck of a walk from our camp to where the temple was. And once we got to the edge of the city, and there's nothing in front of us but blank desert, and we can't see more than 30 feet. The way we got out there was I positioned my wife Robin, who accompanied me out there. She had a compass on her camelback, and I pointed her to where I thought the temple was, and we headed out into the white. And every now and then we would see a bicycle cross in front of our path, or we'd see an art car that was parked looming, in the dust, and we'd take shelter by it for a little while, and then we'd continue walking. But sure enough, after almost a mile of walking in these conditions, the temple finally came into existence right before us. And we were able to go in and pay our respects. And it was actually a truly, truly amazing experience, something that I'll never forget. One of the things I like to do in my spare time is bicycling. As it turns out, I'm a bicycle commuter. So here in Austin, I actually take the bus from home to work. That's mostly to save my coworkers from me being stinky. But I ride my bicycle most days, about 12 miles home, pretty much every day. And I've been bicycling since I was a little kid. One of the things that my brother convinced me to do earlier this summer is a bicycle ride all the way across Iowa. It's 460 miles, and it's called Ragbri. And we did that, and I learned A, what a beautiful state Iowa was, and B, how hard my saddle is, because boy, after 7 days of riding, there was no part of my butt that hadn't been pained by a tiny little triangle that I was sitting on for 460 miles. It was a beautiful state, and if you're a bicyclist, it's one of those bucket list things you should check off one day. Try to ride Ragbri. So I'm really excited to be working on Crowfall. Even though I've spent most of my career doing console games, it's fun to be working back, on a really difficult project with some truly, truly amazing people. I've told Todd Coleman and many other people that ask me about what's it like to work for ArtCraft. And I tell them that it's almost as good as I've ever seen. I've been in the games industry for 26 years, and I probably lost count of the number of projects I've shipped. It's in the teens now. And I've worked with some amazing people, truly legendary and, incredibly smart people in my career. But I've never seen it quite this good. So I'm happy to say that for all the players out there who are waiting for Crowfall, it's going to be fantastic.